So many of the costumes were worn. There are a few costumes that have actually been in existence for many years and have never changed. And those are basically Siddisdal, Telemark, Hallingdal. And they come from many of the valleys where in Norway, in the center part of Norway, where they didn't have a lot of interaction with a lot of people. And those costumes have been in existence for many years and have stayed pretty much the same. And they were the country people, and they wore them for special things like going to church and weddings and funerals and that type of confirmations and special occasions. But many of the other parts of Norway, they may have worn a costume like this in the 17 or 1800s, but they stopped wearing them, or they went out of fashion, or they just didn't have them. And then as the country became more nationalistic after the early 1900s and the split from Sweden, they began to want to embrace their nationalism, and some of the areas of Norway came back and started to look for the costumes again. And there were a few women in Norway that felt that the costumes needed to revive them. So many of the costumes that you see now are ones that they recreated from old costumes, and they started again sort of at the beginning of the 1900s when the Norwegians started to be more nationalistic after the split from Sweden. And so you'll see many of the costumes that we know today are ones that are either recreations from that time or the ones that they decided to create just in certain areas. So now we have 450 different costumes from all the different areas of Norway. Some of them as late as 1970 that they're creating them, and some of them are even working up new ones in different parts of Norway as we know today. So there's every different region in Norway has their own costume. Some of them have just a few for the region, and some of them have multiple ones. And some of them have ones by city, by state, or we call them counties or whatever, and there's all different varieties. There's a book that is called the Bunad Lexicon, and this is the encyclopedia of Bunads in Norway, and it shows you photographs and descriptions of every Bunad that there is in Norway, with all the different kinds of pins that need to be, or that go along with them, and the different headwear that you have, and it shows all of the different types of Bunads in Norway.
I'm assuming that's a fairly expensive book, yes?
Yeah, this book used to be in 3 parts. It was only came in hard copy, and it ran about $1,200. Now it's available in a paperback, and it's in one book, and it runs about $500. It's only available in Norwegian. It doesn't come in an English copy, and it's kind of hard to get. Usually you only buy it in Norway. But it's the one thing that you can always use to look up to what you want to find out about all of the Bunads in the country. So this book over here is one that I worked on, and what it does, it's the end of about, I did anywhere about 90 to 100 hours of research, and it lists pretty much a lot of the different towns, and you can research by city, municipality, or county, and it will give you a suggested what Bunad you should wear based on what county or city or municipality you come from.
I knew you'd want to know.
And then it goes into telling you by each one of those, it will list the specific pictures of each one of those. It also lists all of the history of the Bunads. It will tell you about one of the older ones, which is the Hardanger Bunad. And for many years that was called the national costume, because for the regions that didn't have specific costumes, many people wore that costume as kind of the national costume. So that's why you see a lot of people, even though they may not be from Hardanger area of Norway, they may actually, especially back early as the 20s and 30s, that's the costume that a lot of people wore at that time.
So this is a book that you put together yourself?
Yeah.
It looks like that's what impressed me is right away I realized that's something unique. I've never seen something like this before.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit of story about why I did this book, okay?
Yep.
My aunt, very good, one of my favorite aunts, gave me a book many years ago because I started making costumes and she wanted to make sure that I knew a lot about it. So she bought me my first book. And then I realized I only knew just a little bit. And then I spent a lot of hours looking them up, and I realized that the more information I had, I needed to share it. And if I was going to share it, the best way I could share it was in a reference book. And that way I could pass it to somebody, they could look it up, and I didn't have to sit there and explain it to them. So for all those hours that I put out researching it, I wanted something in English that there's very good reference books, many of them being in Norwegian, but I wanted some way that people could look up the information on bunads in one book in English.
So have you made more copies of this, or is this the only one that
This is
exists?
the only copy that there is out there.
What's going to happen to it when you turn 150 and have to pass away? Just out of curiosity.
I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, is it going to go to somebody, or?
Well, yeah, I guess we give it to somebody. A good part of this book right here is also the PowerPoint presentation that I have on bunads.
Ah, so you go around and give talks at
Right.
different lodges.
Right. I can go to a lodge or a place that may have interest. I go to dance groups that are not necessarily Sons of Norway, and they may have interest in a bunad. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that can last anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending upon what kind of interest they have. And that PowerPoint presentation is based on these counties, and it tells about the locations, and then it lists the more popular ones, you might say. And so that's a section of it, and then within each of those sections in the back of it, it will list the information about the particular bunads, and it will tell you, for instance, on Nordlands, it will tell you when the costume was created. It was created in 1928. What it was based on, it was based on flowers that were found in a farm. It will tell you about the specifics of the costume, that it comes in blue or green. It tells you about what blouse should be worn. It tells you about what fabric it's made out of. It tells you what shoes that should be worn, or the colors of the stockings. So it lists that for all of the major costumes within those regions.
Now you're here at the International Convention, Sons of Norway Convention, and I noticed you're selling the jewelry for the outfits, but it sounds like you're also making outfits for people. Is that true?
Now, I make Festdrakts, which is what is kind of an everyday costume. It's not a bunad. It's not the more official costume, and the costumes that I make do not have the embroidery on it, but they're all the more generic ones. They're not more specific. There are Festdrakts that are specific to certain areas. For instance, the western part of Norway has a very popular one, and there are Festdrakts specific to certain parts of Norway, but the ones that I make are more generic, and they're a lot less money. They're easily obtained for the general public.
Now, I understand you're from North Carolina.
Yeah, I am from North Carolina.
So what part of North Carolina do you live in, and do you belong to a Sons of Norway lodge?
No, actually, I come from the western part of North Carolina. I've come from the Asheville area and the mountains, and we have no Sons of Norway lodge.
Oh, okay.
Okay, no. But I belong to Sons of Norway, but I belong to the big lodge, and so I don't have a specific lodge I belong to, because there is no close-by lodge. So, but I do share this. I do go to various places. I've gone to Knoxville. I've gone to Washington, D.C. I go up to Lake Telemark in New Jersey. I not only give them a presentation on the bunads, but I teach them how to make the Festdrakts as well.
How about going to Norway? I'm assuming you've gone to Norway a few times.
Yeah, I go to Norway, yeah. And when I go visit my family. I go shop. I go shop to buy some of the materials that I use for the costumes. And I go, but I am not the expert on making the costumes, the bunads. There is a woman in the United States who's the expert on making costumes, and she's taken the classes, and she's the expert on making bunads, and she's Sue Sutherland from Bunad Butikken.
Okay, but where is she at? This is something that everybody's going to want to know.
She's in Ely, Minnesota.
Ah, so it is the Ely person then.
Yeah, the Ely, Minnesota, and she's the expert on making bunads. She's been to the many classes and taken the classes in Norway, and she is the expert on making the costumes, and she is the expert on doing them. So I'm sort of the kind of person that if you want information, if you wanted to know what costume you would wear, I can help you with that.
So you're bringing the jewelry back from Norway? Is that where you're getting your...
Most of my jewelry is vintage Norwegian jewelry, but I do buy it in the United States. I buy it online, or sometimes I buy it from people. I try to make sure that everybody knows that there's specific jewelry for specific areas, so I have that information in another book, but my information that I have here is mainly on the costumes, and this information is on the jewelry. So if they wanted to say, for instance, that my costume is from Voss or from Hardanger, what jewelry do I wear? I have that in this book over here. Or I send them to the websites in Norway that gives you all that information.
Okay. Well, I do thank you. Fantastic interview. Fantastic. I'm just really impressed with your...
Now, I would like to say that I have a wonderful blog that I used to keep up with a lot. It's called Norwegian Bunads, and it's a WordPress blog. It's not as good. I haven't done as great a job keeping it up, but it's still out there. So if somebody wanted to look and get some information, and they can always email me, and if they have a question and they want to know what costume they should wear, they can always send me an email, and that I can give. But in that way, if they want to know what costume they should be wearing or they have a question, I can answer them.
Okay. I thank you very much.
Go get one of the little pins, get one in of the second row. So this is a child's Solje, and it has the little dangles on it. And supposedly the dangles were to reflect the sunlight, and the sunlight was to keep away the trolls. And then the trolls would know that it wasn't a troll baby, that it was a human baby, and that's why you should put them on the children. That's kind of the old wives' tale like. Okay. And then you see the other ones standing up in the back that have the crown. That crown is supposedly to honor the Virgin Mary. And so that was the idea of the crown pin. And then this is called a bol, a B-O-L, bol. And they wear this one in Sidesdal, one of those areas I told you where the Bunads is very old and they still wear it, and Telemark. And it has 12 circles. And the 12 circles on the pin depict the 12 disciples of Christ. So, even though this may be based on trolls and the pagan type things, this is based on Christ. And so this kind of a different story, and some of the pins do have significance and some of them don't.
Okay.
So that little bit. And then you go through some of the other pins that are very specific to areas, so some of the areas with the very old Bunads. And so they have the rose pin, and they all just have some, and then the Gothic inspiration from the 1200. And here's what the pin looks like from Nordland. And again, it's not really anything, but it does have this flowers that I told you about that was on that Bunad.
Okay.
And the flowers on that Bunad were based on the flowers I told you that they found on a shawl, and in there, on their Solje, on their not their Solje, but on their buckle, and on what holds their that holds the purse. So on these three things that hold their closure on their the top of their bunad, and on the what holds their purse, has the same design as what's across the bottom of their. And they have some very nice silversmiths up in that part of Norway as well. Telemark has beautiful silversmith. They have some beautiful silver because they do mine silver in Norway. And so there is kind of a old wives' tale that this was for the sea, and these are for the mountains in Nordland, but that's not really the case. Here's the men's, and it has very specific socks that go with Nordlands.
Yeah.
And then here it is for the pup. Now this one is interesting. I'll show you another men's that's not. This is Lofoten,
Okay.
from the Lofoten Islands.
Yeah.
And these are all the flowers, the wild flowers that grow out on the Lofoten Islands.
Okay.
Okay.
So they're a little bit like the Budads, but they also have a square top, I think.
Yeah,
too,
very
square
different.
cut.
And a peplum, their top comes down. This is a very exquisite looking one.
Yeah,
And
I
it
was
has-
noticing that too, that it was really much more flowers and more unique looking.
Right, and then Trøndelag is interesting because you have to understand they have this They have a jacquard on the top of the Trøndelag, and they have a damask. This is on the skirt. They had a great influence from people coming from Asia because they had a lot of trade going on. So they had the influence of an Asian look and the woven type.
Yeah, I was thinking European, like like
Exactly.
Germany, like
Yeah.
Deutschland or something.
I have another interesting, and this is another interesting one here. Now, I don't always have all my facts. I can't always remember everything on this one. This is an interesting part of it, because this is Gudbrandsdal, and if you'll notice hanging on her rack over there, she has a vest hanging on the farthest rack,
okay.
and they have, it looks very Scottish. And it is. It's called the Sinclair Tartan, and it's registered in Scotland. And it happens to be that the War of 1615, the Craigan War in Norway, they killed off all the Scottish men because it was between the Scots and the Norwegians,
Okay.
and they only left the women, and they were able to continue to weave the Scottish plaid. So that is actually a registered Scottish plaid that's still registered in Scotland today. So if you go in and look at the plaids in Scotland, you look up the Sinclair tartan, it's the Gudbrandsdalen tartan. And that's why they have the tartan or the Scottish plaid in that part of Norway, because in that valley they had this large war, and I think it was 1615 or 1631 or whatever. And so the men were, the Norwegians killed off the Scots, except left the women, and they kept their looms, and they continued to weave the Scottish plaid. So there's two areas that have it. Gudbrandsdalen has it, and they also have it in Valdres, and it's got the plaid. And those are registered plaids from, and they're still registered like that in Scotland. Now the women in Norway, you'll see these belts are very expensive. Each little notch of these belts are about $30 a piece, and only the married women wear the silver belt, supposedly.
They don't like rip off a piece to buy a hot dog or anything, do they?
No, and they may actually get one. Now here's another interesting thing. This is Lundeby. This was actually one that's not, it's kind of generic. It's not really specific to any area, but they do wear it in Upland, and they wear it in Hedmark a lot. And they have a white one, and the white one was introduced during the war because they ran out of the dark wool. All the dark wool was going to the soldiers, and so they created the white one.
Oh, okay.
But she's not wearing the right thing. She should have white shoes on.
Wow.
Here's another very interesting fact. This is that many years ago, when they still, during the very early times that they were creating the Bunads, they only would wear black. And the reason they would only wear black is because the way that they dyed blue is called pisse, with urine.
Oh, okay.
And it was thought to be very garish or very gross, and so they would then never wear blue. So it wasn't until many years later that they created the blue. And so this is the crown that they wear for weddings, and they vary, and they usually share them. It's owned by the parish church, and then you borrow it from the church. I told you I have more information than any one human could ever possibly want.